So on this episode, I'm going to take things a little further back mostly and highlight four major principles of the American Revolution that inform the founding generation and are almost universally and totally ignored and rejected today. And let's get right to it. I should start out with one that I think we've all heard at least a version of, and that's Benjamin Franklin. And he said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Now, since that time, this is pretty much all we've gotten. Liberty is dangerous. Liberty is bad. You're with the terrorists. You hate America. You're racist. You're neo-Confederate. Whatever the issue, it is pretty easy to find a huge swath of the population willing to attack you for supporting liberty. They want you, not only they are willing to give it up themselves, but they want you to give up your liberty as well for some perceived security in their own lives, whether it's an economic security or a security from some real or pretended danger from abroad. And real or pretended, for those of you who know, this is a quote from James Madison that I'm kind of hinting at. But this is a principle from the Revolution that liberty should come first. And although Benjamin Franklin wasn't saying that specifically, we certainly got that from Thomas Jefferson and John Dickinson in the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms, which was passed. This is why they were fighting. If you think about the date, July 6, 1775, this was after Lexington and Concord by a few months, and an offer by the British to, well, give up your guns, give up your buddies, and, we won't kill you. And they said, no thanks, and we're going to continue fighting. And here's how Dickinson and Jefferson put it. Although they wanted to show that they were still loyal to their mother country, they said, our attachment to no nation upon earth should supplant our attachment to liberty. So liberty is supposed to be the first goal in anything and everything. Liberty first. And that's how Samuel Adams put it. If you think about the father of the American Revolution, this is maybe one of his first papers, if not his first one published, Loyalty and Sedition, all the way back in 1748. And he said loyalty is founded in the love and possession of liberty. Again, the first goal is liberty. For people like Thomas Paine in his dissertation on first principles of government, I'm not going to cite all these sources going forward here. I will link to that in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. But Paine put it this way. He said, he that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from oppression. So if you want liberty for yourselves, you have to be in favor of liberty for everyone. Even if they're not on your team, you have to put liberty first. We're seeing this over and over and over, whether it's Dickinson or Jefferson or Samuel Adams, Thomas Paine, and, well, here back to Dickinson. And here he is talking about how liberty really is the foundation of everything. We recognize today that the founding generation, the old revolutionaries, when they talked about liberty as being the foundation, they meant it was the ultimate source of peace, prosperity, and human flourishing. If you watched Mike Meharry's short or reel, or depending what platform you're on, he mentioned that as well. But here's Dickinson again. He said, as a foundation and security of all the rest, I wish you a true love of liberty. Mercy Otis Warren talked about liberty being the foundation of all of our happiness and enjoyment as well. She said every domestic enjoyment depends on the unimpaired possession of civil and religious liberty. Dickinson specifically in his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, he said, we cannot be happy without being free. Freedom is what leads to all the rest. It is the foundation. So liberty first. And that's how Patrick Henry put it some years later. He said, when the American spirit was in its youth, the language of America was different. Liberty, sir, was the primary object. So the first principle of the American Revolution that we're talking about that is totally ignored by most people is to focus on liberty first. Most people focus on team first or something else, political goals first, and they think about liberty later. They're okay affecting the liberties of others as long as it doesn't affect their own day-to-day lives. So liberty first is almost universally ignored and rejected today. Now, here's Thomas Jefferson, number 2. We're talking about a rejection of consolidation in support of decentralization. And here's how Jefferson put it in a letter to Joseph C. Cabell. Oh, I said I wasn't going to do that. But anyways, Jefferson said, what has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun. A flair for the dramatic, Thomas Jefferson, but I think he was really onto something. What destroys liberty? Well, the generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body. So when you centralize power, people will be, well, human nature, humans, well, we're flawed creatures, very flawed. We have a lot of bad motives, and we're drawn to bad stuff. And when we have power, we always try to expand that power. Power always grows, whether vested in many or few, is how Abigail Adams put it at one point. But you can find something from all the founders, all the old revolutionaries. Samuel Adams, in one of the best puns of all history, said power is intoxicating, and men who are legally vested in it, well, eventually are going to find a way to expand it. And Jefferson pointed out that centralization of power is what destroys liberty. And although not every single decision that we face today is made by one body, like Jefferson is talking about, a pure consolidation in the view of Montesquieu and his spirit of the laws, it should be easy to see, if we zoom out just a little bit, that the trend is going more and more and more towards a national response to anything and everything, a universal approach. And that means you have few people making the decisions and you have fewer points of failure. One thing goes bad and it's bad for everything. And you know what people do? If they don't like something, they demand a federal law or a federal regulation or a federal court case, an opinion requiring everyone to do it their way. And that's basically how I put it in an article that we published over the long weekend. The impulse from many, I wrote, left, right, libertarian, and the rest, to give the federal government more power to protect liberty from state and local governments might seem like a good idea on the surface. But stop and consider what they're really doing, giving the most powerful government in the history of the world even more power and hoping it'll work out. The most powerful government in history is not the land of the free. And if you're going to them to protect you, you're only giving them more power. You're validating their existence as is and making more people dependent on it. This is not going to work well in the long run. The power, I wrote, that they think will protect liberty today will ultimately be in the hands of people who want to take it away. In short, the power to protect is the power to control. Or as John Jay put it, he was the first Chief Justice later on. He said, remember that a power to do good always involves a power to do harm. Now, he was saying you don't have to reject every piece of power because of that, but it is an important maxim. Here's Samuel Adams talking about consolidation, centralization of power. He said, the people of the United States, and he called it on this one, under one consolidated government, cannot long remain free, or indeed under any kind of government, but despotism. Patrick Henry repeatedly in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, bringing these principles forward to the debate over the Constitution, repeatedly warned about the dangers of centralization. He said, dangers are to be apprehended in whatever manner we proceed, but those of a consolidation are the most destructive. He thought that centralizing power was the worst. Now, no one in the founding generation, in my view, at least at the time of ratification, actually explained the dangers of consolidation better than the great anti-federalist writer Brutus in his first paper. Now, I think it was almost universally accepted that consolidation was bad. The debate was whether or not you were going to get it or not out of the Constitution. And the anti-federalists said, absolutely. The federalists said, well, most of them said, absolutely not. And some of them said, well, we can't stop what happens in the future. Let's just get this done anyways. But here's how Brutus put it. He said, in so extensive a republic, and think, this is 1787, and he's saying that the republic at that time was so extensive, it was unmanageable. In so extensive a republic, the great officers of government would soon become above the control of the people. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And abuse their power to the purpose of aggrandizing themselves and oppressing them. I covered his views in an episode, The Dangers of Consolidation, Anti-Federalist Brutus #1, back in October of 2020. I've been doing all kinds of episodes on series on anti-federalist views because we have to understand both sides to understand what we're talking about anyways. And I will link to that episode in the show notes. But some highlights of why Brutus told us that centralization of power is so dangerous. First of all, it's impossible to represent the will of the people. It's impossible. Just the ones who have the most influence or power, or maybe it's just the will of the majority. Is the majority the will of the people? What if it's 51 versus 49? That's not truly the will of the people. And because of that, you're going to get factions. People are going to take one side or another, and they're going to fight with each other to get control over power, and they're going to think about faction first rather than liberty first. And then eventually you end up with force. If you have to have your way over half the country, or half of the people, or 20% of the people, it's always going to require force. And that's exactly what another anti-federalist writer, Cato, talked about in his third paper. I have an episode on that one as well that I will link to in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. So centralization of power leads to force. It leads to factions. It leads to an inability to represent the people. You have to decentralize to even have a chance for that, if possible at all. And the more that you consolidate power, the larger the government it gets, the more it will require, well, some version of a standing army, whether it's the official permanent professional army or what we have more like today, kind of a de facto one. And that brings me to the third one that I think almost everyone rejects. People who claim to be good on the Constitution want to see us expand and expand and expand what the founding generation thought was the greatest threat to liberty, or very close to it, and that is a large, permanent, standing army. Here's George Mason. He said, once a standing army is established in any country, not most countries, not some countries, not just the monarchies, not the ones with bad rulers, not just over there, but all of them. Any country, when once a standing army is established in any country, the people lose their liberty. And if it's going to be a debate between George Mason and some dude on Twitter today or some social media post, I think I know who's going to win that one hands down every single time. Now, we know that the founders, the old revolutionaries, lived the horrors of an empire enforcing its will through a standing army. They lived it firsthand. If you just think about, just briefly, even the massacre in Boston. And here's Joseph Warren, the great Revolutionary War hero who died in battle. Here he is in a Massacre Day oration telling people that standing armies always endanger the liberty of the subject. Again, it's not sometimes, it's always. Elbridge Gerry, standing armies are the bane of liberty. Mercy Otis Warren put it that way as well, the bane of liberty. Or James Madison, if we're thinking Federalists versus Anti-Federalists in the time of the ratification versus just at the time of the Revolution. Here's Madison has said, as the greatest danger to liberty is from large standing armies. The greatest danger to liberty, according to the father of the Constitution, is from large standing armies. It is best to prevent them by an effectual provision for a good militia. So number three that I think is almost universally rejected by everyone today, including people who are really good on the Constitution on a lot of issues, they feel like, well, times have changed. Well, if times have changed, that's the argument we get from almost everybody all the time. And people will use that argument to say, well, these maxims of history, they don't apply anymore because we live in a modern world, and now we live under the largest government in history. So that's James Madison and number three. And my last one, I don't actually have the picture up for those of you watching, I'm kind of jumping ahead here. These days, I think people, well, if we go back to the beginning of the Revolution, that's 1761 according to John Adams. That was James Otis Jr. and his arguments against the writs of assistance. I'm wearing the shirt. I don't have the meme up on the screen. I didn't think of it while I was prepping for this last night. But he said, an act against the Constitution is void. So this was a radical change in the views of the people at the time. Instead of having a government that could, well, change the Constitution on a whim, whatever the government said is what the Constitution was according to sovereignty of the king and parliament and an unwritten constitution. So the founding generation toiled under this. It's an arbitrary government. A government that can do what it wants whenever it wants, a living, breathing constitution in essence, is a tyranny. That's the definition of a tyranny, even if they happen to be acting in a good way in the short term. The power that they have is what is the great danger to worry about in the long run. So Otis is really kind of injecting a new approach, that a new thought, that sovereignty is with the people, that the Constitution comes from the people, all power comes from the people, and the supreme law of the land is the Constitution. So an act against the Constitution is void, whether the government agrees with that or not, because government doesn't have final say over itself. So what are you supposed to do when the government violates the limits given to it in the Constitution? Are you supposed to wait for the government to say, oh no, well, we did it wrong, sorry for all those people that we prosecuted, we'll get back to that sometime later? That's not what a free people does. And these people, these days, that's how most people take things. They take a resist first approach, resist last approach, instead of a resist a first approach. They think that resistance and opposition and noncompliance is only supposed to be used after trying to change out bombs or going through a bunch of expensive and usually unwinnable lawsuits, but they have it totally backwards. And the image that I had up on the screen just a moment ago comes from James Iredell, who was one of the first associate justices of the Supreme Court, and he took this resist first approach to the Constitution, the debates over ratification. And he said, how do you deal with it? Any government, he was talking about, any government could usurp power. It doesn't matter how good of a constitution we come up with. Eventually, people with power are going to try to go beyond their limits. How do you deal with it? He said the people will resist if the government usurp powers not delegated to it. He did not say the people will resist if they first try to change out the officers of the government, or they get new bums and then they try a lawsuit and that doesn't work, and then maybe 10, 15 years down the line, after thousands of people have been prosecuted by this usurpation of power or ripped off or had their liberties taken, whatever it may be, whatever the issue, he didn't say do it last. He said the people will resist if the government usurp powers not delegated to it, period. And that's how James Otis Jr. put it many years earlier. I think this was 1764. Anyways, if we do not resist at the first attack, it may soon be too late. And Thomas Jefferson, in an early copy of his draft for the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798, where we hear about nullification being the rightful remedy, this is where it comes from. He's talking about how do you deal with an abuse of power. And Jefferson, of course, he lived through the Revolution. He understood those principles. And when he even talked about in letters, he talked about when he was writing up his views for the Declaration of Independence, he specifically said, I'm not trying to come up with anything new here. I was trying to come up with the harmonizing sentiments of the day. He specifically was telling people in that declaration that he was just coming up with the views of the general public of the time. And I think he was taking the same approach here in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. And he said, in cases of an abuse of the delegated powers, the members of the general government being chosen by the people, a change by the people would be the constitutional remedy. Short version, TLDR, Jefferson says, if you just don't like how they're using the delegated powers, you choose new people to get in office. That's it. But anytime they go beyond that limit, it's not the same result. It's not a resist last, it's resist first. He said, where powers are assumed which have not been delegated, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. Not just a good idea, not something to try after you try to get new bums or lawsuits or wait or protests. Nullification is the rightful remedy. And he said every state, and when you're talking about states in this context, and Madison explained this further in his report of 1800, there's different ways to refer to states, but in this context, it's specifically the people of each state, the people of the several states. So final authority really belongs to the people. The state has a natural right, in cases not within the compact, to nullify of their own authority all assumptions of power by others within their limits. That without this right, they wouldn't be under the dominion, absolute and unlimited, of whosoever might exercise this right of judgment for them. So the people of the several states are supposed to be resisting first, nullifying all acts that go beyond the limits of the Constitution, not waiting for the government to say, sorry, we violated the Constitution and all that power you've left us, we're not going to expand it. We need to give it all back. That almost never happens, and once in a while they do it. They'll throw you a bone, and they throw a bone to the other side, and back and forth and back and forth. But all in all, if you zoom out, government keeps growing. It gets more powerful, more expensive, and more despotic. And here's one more on this. Resist first is my favorite. Mercy Otis Warren, the muse of the American Revolution, the conscience of the American Revolution, she said, resist the first approaches of tyranny. Resist the first approaches of tyranny, not resist last. resist first. And I think this is really an essential kind of principle, all of this really, to get out to more and more people. And there's nothing that helps us get that message out to more new people every single day than the financial faith and support of our members. Our membership program starts out as just $2 a month. If you want to do a monthly membership, we also have annual memberships, lifetime, 5-year, all kinds of different options. But we try to make it as cheap and easy peasy as possible. If you want to help us take a stand for the Constitution and liberty in the face of the largest government in history, we're going to keep doing it every single day. Don't feel obligated to join us, but if you're able to, we'll certainly take that dirty government fiat and fight against them as strongly as we're able to. And while I've got another minute or so here in this episode today, I want to say a quick thank you, a huge thank you to just a handful of people who have joined us as members lately. I don't get a chance to do this as often as I'd like, but thank you goes out to Tina in Texas, Nancy and Jeffrey in Florida. There's Caleb in Pennsylvania, Klaus in Colorado, John in New York, Alan in Texas, Kirk in South Carolina, Harold in Illinois, and Linda in North Carolina. Thank you all so much. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members if you'd like to join them. I'm going to take a look over in the chat and see if there's any questions or comments. I did not see that Happy Snowfish asks, speaking of despotic, what do you think of the speech Thursday? I don't pay it. Honestly, I have so much work that I do on a day-to-day basis. I don't spend time watching the day-to-day commentary from the Imperial whatever. It was a crazy provocation is what I've seen a lot of people that I respect saying, this is what you get. You certainly, the more that you centralize power, you're going to get what George Washington warned about, what anti-federalists warned about over and over and over, that people will turn everything into an us versus them approach because the goal is to control the largest government in history. And they have to make their opposition look like the enemy of everything. That's the only way to maintain power. And it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Brian Wilkes says, good information as always. Thank you. I do my best. I'm so lucky to have the opportunity to share the wisdom of the founders and old revolutionaries with you. I'm glad you find this interesting. I started doing this show over 4 years ago just with the idea of like, man, I've got all this video and audio gear. I might as well this is fun. I love this kind of stuff. I might as well just kind of start sharing some things. I'm surprised that so many people are interested in some of this geeky kind of info, so I appreciate it. Jim says, salute, and Dio Vindice. Thank you so much as well. Mark Steelzer says, Steel Senior, nullify the ATF, GCA, NFA. There, I fixed it. Yes, all federal gun control is unconstitutional. It is really never going to go away until the people, and we could say this about every issue. Same with the war on drugs. When the government is not authorized to do something, waiting for the government to stop doing what the government wants to do anyways is the dumbest strategy ever. Going to the government to get the government to fix problems created by the government is dangerous. It guarantees that the government will continue to grow. We have to resist first, just like Merciotis Warren had to say, and so many others. Taking a look back in the chat and see if there's any other questions. The Department of Injustices wreaked upon the commons. Certainly, all the departments. Ultimately, it's not going to be easy. We're not going to turn this around in a year. Most people, when I see them providing solutions, they're always some kind of a silver bullet. Just do this, and it's going to be over. We just need this. We need this amendment, or we need this judge, or we need this person in power, and everything's going to be on the right track. But this is absurd. We are not understanding. If we take that position, we're not understanding the danger of the largest government in history, and I can't say that enough. A free people, Thomas Jefferson said, claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift of their chief magistrate. John Dickinson said, who are a free people? They're not people, and I'm paraphrasing, they're not just the people who happen to live under government who happen to be doing the right thing. No, they live in a situation where government is so kept in a box that even if it tries to take a single step beyond that limit, it gets rejected, resisted, checked, and controlled. Or as Thomas Paine put it, those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. Guneye says, I believe the Anti-Federalists had it more right. I should actually, at some point, I think in many areas, they certainly were absolutely correct, almost prophetic. And I think many of the Anti-Federalists were thinking more long-term, and the Federalists were thinking more short-term. And one other thing that I saw a lot of difference in, and mind you, that excludes people like James Madison, John Dickinson, and probably Iredell, maybe Benjamin Franklin, who said, look, I don't even support everything in the Constitution. This is on Constitution Day, September 17, 1787. He's saying, let's all sign this. Let's get this done. We got to move forward. And then it's going to end in despotism, as every form of government before it. So you could find people on the Federalist side who are in favor of the Constitution, who recognize the warnings of the Anti-Federalists. I think the Anti-Federalists were a little bit more far-thinking in how they saw human nature went. And at some point, as I continue going through the Anti-Federalist papers with various episodes and speeches by people like Patrick Henry, I should do a comparison of some of the areas where I think they were right and they were wrong on both sides. I don't know if that's a big one, but I think that's an important thing to mention. Guneye, thank you for the comment. I'm taking a look and see if there's any other questions or comments I can get back to quickly. No, I will scroll through it a little bit later on today. Again, if you support the show, don't forget the membership program, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. You can also do a few easy peasy free things like smashing the like button, reviews on Apple Podcasts and any other podcast platform. Certainly help out a lot. Leaving comments, all the stuff that triggers algorithms, tells the platforms to show us to more people. It's helping us reach way more people than I ever imagined when I started the show 4 years ago. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you learned something. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I'll see you on Friday here on the path to liberty.